Welcome to She Said Homestead, the podcast that explores homesteading from a range of perspectives. We're Sage and Mickayla, two homesteaders, each with unique experiences, properties, and future goals for our homesteads. We're discussing various homesteading topics, sharing our personal experiences as women working full-time who are managing homesteads as well, and shining a light on the stories of other inspiring homesteaders.
Before we dive in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy our podcast, please consider leaving a review. It really helps us grow and share these homesteading stories with even more people.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Sage from Terra Nova Acres.
And I'm Mickayla from Calico Cow Acres, and we both have homesteads in Western North Carolina.
Today, we're going to be talking about community building through homesteading. But before we get into that, why don't you tell me a little bit about your week, Mickayla?
I have a really hard time gauging whether or not I did a lot in previous weeks versus this week because it feels like I did a ton this week. So I have a bit of a list here. But I've been off social media this week very intentionally. I was not interested in the chaos that is ensuing currently in the social media world. And that's been really nice. I have been posting a whole bunch of YouTube videos though. I feel like I'm back in the groove of posting consistently so much that I've posted like 4 videos in the last week and I'm about to post 2 more this week. And I have 3 more ready for next week already. I'm ready to go. I'm very much enjoying filming again. And I owe all of the gratitude towards that new camera that I got. It 100% has changed my life as far as filming goes. It's so freaking convenient. I started seeds last week when we had Brooke on. I had said I need to start my lisianthus, eucalyptus, lettuce, and onions, and I started those finally. Taylor helped me, which I'm really looking forward to. He said he enjoyed it and he had a nice time. So I'm hoping that he'll help me start seeds the rest of the season because I don't enjoy doing it and it would be really nice to have company. Saturday, we went to Lowe's and we made like a big trip. We borrowed the neighbor's trailer and loaded up 2,500 pounds worth of block. And we got low tunnel supplies and wood and all of the things we need for our greenhouse foundation. I moved those things 3 times that day, so I lifted 7,500 pounds worth of block. I just want to point that out in one day. And then I tried to be social. I tried to put myself out and build some community. And we went about like an hour north of us, 45 minutes north of us, and we were going to go to like a garden planting party at a brewery. And then we found out on the way there that it was canceled. So we just went to the brewery and had a beer and got dinner and stuff anyways, and then we came home and that was like the first sunny day in a handful of days. It had been in the low teens, single digits temperatures at night, and our laundry room, all of the piping out there is not insulated because we don't have access to insulate it, and the rest of our piping is in our basement, so it stays nice and warm, but that always freezes at least once a winter, and this was the time. But it decided to thaw that day, and the one time that we left our house for like more than a few hours, we came home and our laundry room, we could hear the water pouring out of whatever pipe or whatever, and the whole laundry room was flooded. Our whole carport was flooded. We had like a river going down our driveway, and yeah, that was really fun to deal with. But on Sunday, we got it dealt with. And when I say we, I mean Taylor, because I was doing other things. But it's cleaned up now. And it's partially fixed. I know how to deal with freezing pipes. I've lived in enough crappy Michigan apartments to know that I need to leave the faucets running and stuff. And Taylor left the sink running, but it still froze out there. Like, that's how cold it got. I don't know. There was literally like water frozen dripped out of the faucet. So it must not have been big enough. The last thing that I did this week was I dug a really big hole. we dug a hole for the foundation of our greenhouse into like the side of our garden hill, and that took us 2 nights. I thought it was going to take way longer, but I'm very, very happy because that means that likely our greenhouse is going to be up in the next couple of weeks and I'm going to be able to use it. I'm very excited.
No, that's so exciting. And goes back to you guys get to be the guinea pig because I have not touched my greenhouse since I touched it like Christmas time. So I am genuinely excited for you to get that up. That's game changer for sure. But I'm also excited that I get to learn vicariously through you before I try to tackle mine.
Yeah, I feel like we've flipped back and forth on that a few times where it's like, okay, I was gonna start mine first, but then your dad was there and he started it in quotes. And then I was like, okay, well maybe Sage is the guinea pig, and now I think we might be the guinea pigs again. Not that you're gonna do the whole foundation thing, which honestly, if it were just me, I would, and I lived on a mountain in particular, I would absolutely not do the full foundation because I swear I almost died lifting up all those blocks. Like it was a lot.
I think the last time that I bought cinder blocks, I can't remember. It was probably cinder blocks for the beehives. I I didn't have one of those like big hefty carts because they put the like lumber carts and whatever on clear on the other side of the store, and the cinder blocks were like on the other side. I don't know what happened. For one reason or another, I was like, this is stupid. I'm not walking 8 miles to go get a cart. So I just got like a normal push cart because I was only getting a handful of cinder blocks, and then I pushed it out the door. I was like 5 steps out the door and then hit a crack in the parking lot and the cart like flipped clear over. I didn't hurt myself, but it could have been so bad. So I have some issues with cinder blocks clearly. So I'm glad for that reason as well that I will not be purchasing 2,500 pounds of cinder blocks. I don't think that would go very well for me.
Don't do it. Don't do it. If it were just me, I wouldn't have done it. And even with both of us, I was like questioning it.
But the water, so did you have any like actual water damage to your house or anything from that? Or did it all flow out and like you guys are okay as long as you can just fix the pipe?
So that room is part of our carport, which like the concrete floor of the carport and that room is all one, and it's already all sinking and just like really messed up. It needs to be completely redone at some point, and it's because there's no like support underneath it for the roof over there, and there should be, and they just didn't do that for some reason. So it's already messed up anyway, and our house already has a whole bunch of water damage in the basement, and like that whole area is already water damaged, so it didn't do any harm. And that's not the first time that's happened. I left the laundry sink on once and flooded the entire room. Don't tell Taylor that, he doesn't know. He wasn't here. And then whenever it rains, we have just like storm windows in there. So sometimes we leave the screens open in the summer to like get airflow in there. And whenever it rains, that room, it comes in that room anyway. So that room gets wet pretty often, unfortunately. But it's fine. It was just kind of a pain in the butt to deal with on one day. Thankfully, it's all cleaned up now.
Nice.
What were you up to this week?
This week has been this week has been a hell of a week. I guess technically this was week before this last week by like one day, but I'm gonna group it in with this. Quit my job. Put in my 2 weeks notice in my job. So that feels weird. I've worked there longer than I've had the homestead. I've worked there for 4 years and feels strange to walk away from that. So that's a big deal. And also just in general, work has been taking up a lot of my time and mental energy for various reasons. So I already feel kind of like tired and weirded out from that. And then this week is the week that the sheep had, well, 2 of the sheep had their lambs. There's still a third ewe who is 99% sure she's pregnant, but she probably won't lamb for another month at least. So yeah, first ewe, I really wasn't expecting her to lamb that soon. I just had like this weird little inkling in my head and I couldn't go to sleep until I checked on them. Walked up there and was like, oh my god, there is a lamb standing next to you and it's 14 degrees outside. Let me check on you guys and make sure you're okay. So she had 2. One of them was in the run-in shed trying to get milk from the hay holder, which obviously is not a sheep, and that's not going to work. The second one was more intelligent and was next to Mom. But yeah, the look on her face, if she could speak, it said, "What was that? Like, what just happened?" Because that's the first time they've had lambs, and obviously I'm a newbie too. And so made sure that they got dried off, which for how cold it was, super important. Made sure that they were eating. So I have the run and shed itself, which is a shelter, but then within that I have a lambing jug is what they call it, which it's just 4 wire panels basically, and it's a place where mom and babies can all be together and it just kind of helps them bond. They're a little bit more likely to get rejected. Mom, at least in what I've seen, mom kind of tends to pick one favorite and is like, I'm going to feed you, I'm going to take care of you, and then the other one is just like, sorry. So it's just helpful for them to be all in the same space, all together. The lambs don't have to go far for milk, like everything's right there. And so I'm very glad I went up there. I think things would have turned out very differently if I hadn't. Eventually, or the next day, one of those lambs did not make it, which for lambs is kind of normal. He just was kind of too calm. He wasn't going out of his way to beat his mom up for milk, which is kind of what they have to do. And so he didn't make it. I buried him next to Rocky, and that will be his final resting place. And then, like 5-ish days later, the ewe that I thought would lamb first finally lambed, and she had 3 technically. One of them was not alive when it was born, and it wasn't an issue of like it got stuck or it took too long. Like it looked like it had stopped developing weeks ago. So she had 2 healthy lambs, and they're both still doing good. But she picked her favorite, and it was the firstborn, and it's a girl. So right now there's 2 ram lambs and 1 ewe lamb. So 2 boys, 1 girl. It's been an adventure, for sure. And on top of all that, the first mom got a little bit of mastitis, so that's been a whole thing to figure out. And also, on top of that, I harvested the ram because it was his time. I wanted to keep him long term. I did not want to harvest him, but he started behaving in ways that I don't want to keep an animal around who does that, for my safety and for the safety of people and kids who are around here. So he went to the green pasture in the sky. I had a neighbor help me do that, and then in the same day, I also helped that same neighbor harvest his bull. So just lots of stuff going on, both in Homestead world and not in Homestead world.
With the whole job situation, are you quitting your job and doing homesteading, doing YouTube, doing something else full time?
I so wish that I was in a place to just quit my job and be like, oh, but I'm not. I'll be still working, just not at the same place.
Okay, and then about the lambs, or the sheep, I guess. I thought when you texted me like midnight, whatever night the first one had the lambs, that it was the one that you were having issues with, like the prolapse and stuff, but that was actually the second one that gave birth? Wow.
Right, yeah, there was one ewe that I kind of started to have some prolapse issues, like very minor in terms of how bad prolapse can be. It was like baby, not really a huge deal. But yeah, she was actually the second one to give birth, but she is the one that I walked up there thinking like maybe something's going on with her, I just need to check. But yeah, it was the sheep that I was not expecting. Queso went first, and then Dolce was second, and Leche still. She's still baking the buns in the oven.
Do you have names for the lambs?
No, I feel like that's a tricky thing, naming lambs, because ultimately there's 3 options, and they're not really great. So either nature's going to take its course and they might not make it, which if they have names makes it exponentially more sad, or I'm going to sell them, and it's also sad. or it's going to make me keep them, which everyone knows I don't need that. So it just doesn't go anywhere good.
Well, the fourth option is that you butcher them as lambs for meat, right? Like, is that part of the plan in the future at all?
No.
No? Okay, I wasn't
Look,
sure.
I'll do it if it's a situation like the ram where, you know, I've raised this animal since it was a baby and I now have it and my options are like I could try to sell it, which I actually did put it up on Craigslist and try to sell it before I nixed him. And that didn't pan out. I wasn't really expecting it to pan out. But yeah, I'll do it, but I don't like lamb enough as meat to go out of my way to do it. It's a heavy thing. It's a heavy thing to take the life of an animal that you've raised, and it's not easy. It's better than it going to waste, but I'm not going to volunteer myself for that.
That's fair. I know at some point you had mentioned that like that might be a possibility, but you weren't quite sure, so I figured it was good to clarify that.
Now that I've experienced what it's actually like to harvest a bigger animal like that, yeah, I'll do it, but it's never going to be my plan A. That's for sure.
Yeah, I know that I've never done it, but I know that like sheep in particular are very like personal. Like it's a very one-on-one situation, so I completely understand that.
Moving on to today's topic. Just for context, we are recording this the week after the inauguration. So it's end of January right now, and I feel like we've got to kind of acknowledge the new political environment and what's going on, and that's certainly been top of mind for me in this last week, which also hasn't made it any less stressful. But particularly, I have had moments where I just feel kind of helpless keeping up with current events and watching all of these executive orders roll through and just not knowing what the future holds, but seeing the writing on the wall kind of deal. And especially as one person, you feel kind of helpless to stop anything. It feels like, you know, what can I do to make any meaningful change? And I think, for one, I think that's intentional. For one, I think we live in America in such an individualized society that you're right. As one person, what are you going to do? But as a community, and speaking more in terms of, you know, existing communally together, that's where the power lies, right? You know, if we'll say if the powers that be, if they were abusive, right? What would they want? Like sit back for a minute and think about if you were this hypothetical evil dictator, what would you do to make the people in society really easy to control? You know, just hypothetical, not at all related to to the current administration, by any means. But if I were an evil dictator, I would want my population to be number one, tired, number two, stressed, and number three, isolated. Because all of those things disempower you as a person. If you are having to use all of your brain power to get through the next 6 hours of your day, you don't have anything left to kind of worry about your neighbor, right? Because by design, you kind of have to worry about yourself. And so resisting those efforts can come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. It doesn't have to be some grand, huge, big thing. It can be as simple as doing the exact opposite of being tired, stressed, and isolated. It can be as simple as getting a good night's sleep. It can be as simple as just taking 15 minutes out of your day to sit down and recenter yourself. It can be just as simple as going out of your way to build a little bit more community.
I feel a little bit hypocritical talking about this on the podcast because I literally just put a video out on my own channel saying, like, I'm not going to get political. I'm not going to talk about this kind of stuff on my channel because I want it to be a place of peaceful respite, like, escape from all of this. But I think the podcast kind of inherently, it requires me to talk more. It requires us to talk more and have conversations about the world that we're living in. And that's something that needs to be addressed. This is something that needs to be addressed. So if you're not into that, you probably want to leave right now. But I also want to say, I grew up in a household that was very strictly, I'll say, like, defined as, we're not into politics. So, like, a lot of the stuff that's going on, as much as I try to educate myself on it, is above my head. And I really do try. And like I said, I'm off social media right now. Like, I'm really trying to limit the amount of stress and anxiety that I cause myself due to all the stuff that's going on. So I might not even be aware of some of the stuff that's happening. But something that I can wrap my head around is community. And I think that that's going to be the way to get through anything, whether it be a harmful government situation or an environmental catastrophe or whatever you can think of. Like, I think having each other's backs in a lot of different forms is the way to get through those kinds of things.
Yeah, and there's certainly value to having spaces that can be dedicated to, we're not going to talk about that here because it has become so divisive. But also, if that's not balanced with being able to call things out when human rights, basic human rights hang in the balance, when they are things that need to be talked about because there is fundamental harm happening, then you're part of the problem. And then saying nothing is just as bad, right? Like, how many times in world history, especially World War II, do you sit in that classroom and think, like, how did that happen? And it happened because people stayed quiet. Not everybody stayed quiet, but enough people stayed quiet. And if you don't let that happen, like, you have to hand your power over. You have to do that. And obviously that is its own topic, and that's not what we're talking about today, but it's adjacent to it, and we want to speak to it to the extent that it makes sense. But yeah, obviously that is its own conversation.
Also, in the past few months, I've kind of been preparing for the chaos of this week and the next however many years. And preparing to, like, make a bunch of things myself and teach myself a bunch of skills. Because I'm finding that it's growing harder consistently by the day to find companies that I can trust to purchase, like, even just the most basic goods from. And I feel like those are skills that, like, moving forward, if I can kind of nail some things down, like making my own soap, making my own deodorant, just like the most basic things, that if I can nail them down, I can teach them to other friends locally and neighbors, and maybe pass on some sort of, like, glimpse of hope amongst all of the prioritization of profit over people.
Yeah, I've felt very similarly. I mean, between all the greenwashing and these, like, DEI reversals and just, like you said, generally, like, profit over people, like, I want to be able to buy some freaking mason jars without feeling like I'm betraying my neighbor because I'm buying from a company that just, like, truly doesn't care about anyone except for padding the pockets of their CEO. Like, the fact that that's the reality we live in, where, like, I don't even know where to buy mason jars from a non-evil company, is just, it's crazy. Okay, but let's switch things to more positive spin. Let's stop focusing on what's wrong and figure out some meaningful things that we can do as individuals to work towards this more community-based aspect where we have a little bit more power over things. So, how about things that we've done to this point, particularly through homesteading, to build community?
Community is such a hard topic for me personally to discuss because It's something that I so dearly want, and I know that it's the right thing to invest in and interact with and build. But I'll also be the first person to admit that, like, in-person community in particular is something that my anxiety is like, avoid at all costs. Do not interact with people. Like, just stay in your bubble. So it's something that, because I know that it's something I want, I have to push myself and make myself come out of my comfort zone and just like be uncomfortable with the fact that other people are going to be talking to me and I have to have conversations, and it's a good thing. Like, overall, I know it's a good thing, but it's really, really hard. In this, there's like a lot of push and pull with that. I feel like I found a decent number of ways to kind of build community since moving down south. We had like a really good community when we lived in Michigan, centered around other things. But now that we're here and we're homesteading, I feel like we've got a good friend group going down here. It's my social group in general, not my like close core friend group, but my social group is constantly expanding, and I'm trying to reach out to people and make friends, and not even friends where I like need to be communicating with you on like a weekly basis, even if it's like once or twice a year, where I'm like, hey, we're acquaintances and we know each other, and we have some sort of benefit in this relationship. Like, we both are getting something out of this, whether it's just the community aspect of like being able to interact with someone and bounce knowledge off of each other, or it's like a physical benefit, anything like that. But a few ways that I've figured that out are selling eggs. I have probably at least a 15 to 20 minute conversation with everybody who consistently comes to pick up eggs at our house every single time. And I genuinely love some of the people who come get eggs from us, and they come every week, every other week, even once a month. We always catch up. Like, I've brought them inside to show them our renovation updates. Like, they're all invested. Some of them watch our YouTube channel, and it's just really cool. Like, that's been a really cool way to build community, although I'm not interacting with them like outside of that situation. It's still nice to know that like there are people who know me and recognize me and are benefiting from the homestead things we're doing here.
That's really interesting. So I have also sold eggs before, and that was kind of my hope going into it, was that I was going to, it's going to give me an excuse to meet these people who live next to me and connect with them over food, and, give my neighbors a way to have access to cost-effective, high-quality food. And that was so not my experience. I stopped selling eggs because it ended up just being like random strangers pulling up in my driveway when it's like 9:30 at night, and then my dogs freak out, and then it's like it's so stressful, and I'm trying to run from the back corner of my pasture down to the driveway so that, like, not that cover would never bite anybody, but so that like they're not thinking that my dog is about to maul them. Like, it became so unreasonable for me, and that was one of the ways that I kind of was actively trying to build community and had to abandon because it just didn't make sense for me personally. So I'm glad that it works out for some people.
Yeah, that's one of the situations where I have to step back and tell myself, like, when I get frustrated, and I'm not frustrated with anybody in particular messaging me. So, like, if anybody who gets eggs from me listens to this, like, I'm not mad at you. It's just, like, I get overwhelmed so easily when I get messages, and it's nothing to do with the person themselves. It's just neurodivergence yet again. It's something where I've had to step back and be like, okay, this is how you meet people. This is how you can interact, and you're benefiting these people with organic eggs that are $5 a dozen. Like, they can't get that at the store, especially not right now. They get to meet my birds if they want to. Like, I every time somebody messages me for the first time, I say, you can come meet my birds. I will tell you all of their names. You can see their living situation. I want you to know that they are living amazing lives, and like, I try to be transparent about that. And yeah, I feel like I could say so much on this. Like, it's a way to build community. And for me in particular, like, I don't drive, so having people come to my house, whether it's like people I don't really know that well or close friends, is convenient for me. So I kind of have to like let go a little bit of that. Like, okay, the messages are a little bit frustrating sometimes, and I have to deal with them, but I know that it's for the best overall.
Mm-hmm. I guess one more thing about eggs before we move on from just eggs. But I do still share eggs. It's just in a different way. I do still, extend that outward. It's just not in this very literal transactional way. I take them to my neighbor who helped me harvest the ram. I'm very intentionally trying to build this like trading foods and services relationship with him because he has great skills that I don't have and I have great skills that he doesn't have. And so it's incredibly helpful to both of us for us to do what we're good at and let the other person benefit off of that, especially as one person. Like, I'm one person here doing all the things as best as I can manage. And so there are ways to reap the benefits of other people without having to do something like, have a live-in romantic partner, which is kind of like how we've been, I'll say, trained to see those sorts of things. Which brings me to, like harvesting meat. I think in general, for a lot of people, that's a communal event. Very rarely do people do that just by themselves. And that can be a bull, that can be a ram, that can be a batch of chickens. And that's an instance that, for me, homesteading kind of made me break my habit. I'll call it a habit of just trying to do everything myself. In so many ways and in so many aspects of life, I just find it easier to do it myself. I can tend to get really irritated when I make a plan with someone and they change the plan for whatever reason. That really throws me off. I can get really irritated when like I get my blinders on because I get so like entrenched in the task that I just want to do the task and I just don't do those normal human things of like socializing while you're doing it. I'm like, what? Why would I do that? Right? Like there's just some things that don't click in my brain that it becomes easier for me to tackle it by myself. But there are so many things in homesteading that I've had to get over it. Just straight up had to. And could I do it by myself if I absolutely had to? Sure. But would it be miserable? You bet it would. And so harvesting chickens really pushed me to expand my community. Someone was very gracious and offered to teach me how to do it instead of me watching YouTube videos and fumbling around, not having, a mentor right next to me to help walk me through it. Chrissy, my friend that we've had on the podcast before, she is great at dispatching. I'm terrible at dispatching. I'm great at eviscerating. She's terrible at eviscerating. And so we can come together and we can balance each other. And sitting there harvesting 30-something chickens with a good friend is way better than doing it by yourself. With the ram, my neighbor has done, I call them cows. I know that's just the female one, but I just call them cows colloquially. If that messes you up, I'm sorry. But he's done cows before, right? Like he gets it. I had never done a ruminant before, and so it was so indescribably valuable to have him there to help, stun the animal with a bullet, which I'm not really comfortable with, shooting something. But I was comfortable with, I don't know how to say this without flagging it on YouTube, but like you gotta drain the blood from the animal. Like I can cut a throat, I can do that, but I can't sit there and put a bullet in a skull. So it's all about balance, and if I don't have to carry all of these things by myself, if I get to do what I'm good at and let other people do what they're good at, everything flows so much easier.
What's interesting to me is a lot of the times we get ourselves into these situations where like we know we'll have to do something, but we don't quite know how to do it. And then someone comes along and is like this miracle help. And it's like, oh, I have somebody who knows how to do this. Like you didn't go into getting sheep knowing that your neighbor was going to help you butcher your ram, like because he was being aggressive. The ram, not the neighbor. Right? Like that feels like the universe saying this is what you're supposed to be doing. At least in my mind. That's pretty cool. Something else that I feel like we've mentioned so many times at this point, but it's just like this little thing where it's like, okay, I have these friends that I met online and I'm able to bring them together into this little friend group in person because they live semi near to me. Our little apple cider pressing parties and our gingerbread decorating parties, like they're not anything that's like practicing homesteading skills or anything too crazy. Like apple cider pressing is just most of us sitting around while Taylor presses the apples. But it's still valuable to me in a way that's different. It's just a fun time. Like it's a fun day to interact with people that you know aren't going to be judging you. They get you and you can kind of just like relax. You don't have to fully mask or anything. And it's not necessarily like hardcore stressful like butchering days are.
It can be very comforting and valuable in ways that I don't have the words for right now, to balance just sort of, I'll call it daily life, where, you know, we all navigate situations and environments and people where we don't totally agree, and that's part of life, right? But it's so relieving to be able to balance that with being around people who share your values and who, you know, you can have a conversation and you're just kind of on the same page, and there's so much less emotional labor, I guess, that goes into those things. But you know, everything in balance. You don't want to be constantly in an echo chamber. But I feel that too when I get to be around other people, not even necessarily homesteaders, just like people who enjoy good homegrown food, people who enjoy sitting around drinking beer while you're making some apple juice, right? Like that's just a good time.
Yeah, and I feel like for us in particular, just like the way our personalities work, and then I guess friends that have homesteads as well, it's really fun to do it around some sort of project. So around the gingerbread houses, around apple cider pressing, or like whenever we'll come up and visit you, and it's like sometimes you need a tree cut down, and Taylor just happens to have that skill. And it's fun. Like it's still work, you know, we're working and whatnot, but it's fun because it's not like a task on my to-do list at my house that's like part of my mile-long list of things that I need done. It's like an outing. I get to socialize with people I know that I enjoy. I don't know. I would compare it to going to like an amusement park. It's like relaxing in a fun way, but you're still doing some sort of project. Like it's centered around something.
I feel that. I think Chrissy and I have both texted each other at some point and been like, I'm sick of my garden. Like I need I need someone to come, like, just help me. And there's something to be said about someone being there to help you with it when you're used to doing it alone, but also I think there's something to be said for, like, I could be equally sick of my garden and taking care of all the weeding things and planting things, and she texts me, she's like, "Hey, I need help." And I'm like, "Sweet. Just anything that's not my garden." And I kind of have like a renewed energy about it. It's really interesting. Like you said, it's still work. It's still doing the things that in theory I'm sick of, but just having the company doing it and having the change of scenery is just really refreshing.
Doing something like that always re-motivates me for my own space. Like having a different perspective, like going elsewhere. And it's kind of like how my garden is for when I get off of the computer for the day, like working. I'm like, okay, I needed this to give my brain a break. And sometimes you need that from your own garden as well. Like sometimes you just need to go to somebody else's house and be like, okay, this is just as chaotic as mine in a different way. I can help you. And then I go home and I'm like, I got this. Like, I can handle this. This is another thing that I feel like we've touched on so many times, so I'm just gonna say it quickly, but building community with the hurricane cleanup process. Like, I met so many of my neighbors in that process that I've never met before. I was able to, like, get across that they're always welcome to stop by here for eggs. Like, we're always happy to see them if they need to stop by for any reason. Like, I'm always willing to be a helping hand, I guess. And then the last thing I have written down for how I feel like I've built community is this podcast. Not just online, but locally. Like, we've met and had guests on for our local area. Most of the people we've had on as guests are within an hour of us. And obviously we're trying to expand that, but I think that having the podcast and being able to connect with you guys who are listening and other people online is really cool, but it's also really helping us interact with others who are local to us. And that's not something that I really expected, but I really appreciate that about this whole system that we've got going.
Right, so we have this podcast, which clearly we do together, and then we both have individual social medias that we run related to our homesteads, and that's primarily YouTube. We're kind of on Instagram. And that's also another like community in and of itself. There's the podcast community, there's the community related to my stuff, there's community related to your stuff, and those are to some degree pretty interlinked.
Right, and I would say in the last few months especially, I've gotten more picky, I guess, with my social media interactions, because it had gotten to a point for me, especially like Instagram, where it didn't feel like it was giving me anything. And a lot of the times previously, I would get on Instagram or other social media to like find inspiration for things. And I felt like it was taking more than it was giving for me. So I'm really picky about my social media interactions now, obviously being on like a social media break in general this couple of weeks. It's something that I use to relax at the end of the day and find inspiration, find creativity, like I said. As much as I respect other people's opinions on things, Instagram in particular can feel like a very toxic place at times, and I don't want to be stressed out or defensive or whatever you want to call it while I'm trying to relax or like decompress at the end of the day. So people who I don't really vibe with in terms of political beliefs, growing food, all of that kind of stuff, like, I'm just not interested in interacting with them on social media as much. But when it comes to like my in-person, like local neighbors and whatnot, those are people that I want to know that like in an emergency situation, whether it's a week without power from the hurricane or it's some sort of prolonged catastrophe, this might be like an anarchist perspective, I guess. I don't really care what they believe in. I don't really care who they voted for in any past election. I don't really need to be their best friend and see them daily. But I do need to know that I can rely on them in a situation where it truly matters, and vice versa. Like, I need them to know that they can rely on me. So I have a very different view of community when it comes to social media versus in-person interactions.
I can certainly understand what you mean. I definitely have zero desire to go out of my way to, on social media, follow anybody who I just don't see eye to eye with in that way. But I think, especially with the election stuff, I've had to have a level of accountability for me and myself. You know, after the results came out, I went through this whole, like, I guess, shock and grief period where I was like, how could this happen? I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't understand how this happened. And then listening to other voices, especially Black women, especially people of color, because I feel like so often they're screaming the answer and like we just don't know how to freaking listen. And one of the big points that I walked away from that sort of information gathering with, and then I continue to think about, is like, specifically referencing what people call personal held beliefs that end up directly harming people. I'm not talking about like the price of eggs. I'm talking about human rights and the acceptable costs and trade-offs of things. Like, especially when you look like we do, how many times and in how many ways were people who had fundamentally harmful beliefs? Like, how many times did I make them comfortable by not confronting things? And I'm not talking about like people saying egregious things. Of course, if someone says something just like totally outlandish, yeah, I'm gonna check you on that. But it's the little things, it's the microaggressions, it's the little stuff that in that moment you're like, it's not worth the confrontation. Or it's like, I don't want to be confrontational with this person because I want to be able to, I don't know, like wave at you when you drive by, because we both live in some pretty rural areas, and like I have vastly different political beliefs than 90% of my neighbors. And I do want to have this local community of people that I can rely on so that when a hurricane comes through, right, I'm not out of drinking water, which is what would have happened if I hadn't relied on my conservative neighbors up the street to give me water. But also at the same time, like, how how am I not the problem if I basically allow certain things around me for the sake of peacekeeping at someone else's expense instead of mine? That's what I continue to struggle with in terms of this like local community aspect. It's I don't have answers. I'm still working through it. I'm still figuring it out. But I probably will continue to do that for a long time.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that either. My only answer is that, like, I've had to come to terms with, like, people's lives to me are more important than what they believe in. And regardless of what they believe in, my neighbors are my neighbors. And I want to make sure that in an emergency situation, they're taken care of. And I would hope that they would do the same for me. So that's kind of the conclusion that I've come to. And I don't interact with enough of my neighbors on a regular basis that it's like I'm having to call them out on things, you know?
Going back to the building community on social media aspect of this, especially with all the drama around Meta and all of the ridiculous things that Mark Zuckerberg is doing. I contemplated leaving the platform, and I contemplated, kind of effectively you have to leave that community because one man has ego issues and whatever. And at the end of the day, I was like, you know what? Instead of leaving, I think I'm just gonna get like really obnoxiously loud about these things that I have tried not to shove in people's faces, because I think there is value to having a space, not all spaces, but a space that's not political. And I'm really tired. I'm really tired of worrying about how things are going to be received. And going back to like I recognize that I'm still part of the problem in a lot of ways, but like that's one way that I want to not be the problem. I want to be really loud about the things that are just like objectively sociopathically wrong with our society that like shouldn't be a debate, but for some reason are. So yeah, and I'm sure that's gonna drive some people away, and I am perfectly fine with that. Again, I don't make enough money on social media to like to, to care. I make zero money from Instagram, that's for sure, and I barely make enough money to get paid every payment increment on YouTube. And so it's like I'm just in this place where I'm in a way almost like grateful that I kind of feel like I have nothing to lose, because what do I care if I lose 500 followers? It's not like it affects my ability to support myself. And also on the other end of that, I'm trying to find those people, right? And you can't find those people if those people aren't vocal about what they're doing. So that's where I'm at with the whole social media community thing. Like I want to be obnoxiously loud and very overt about what I'm about, and if you're not about that, fine. I have particular judgments if you disagree with me on things that maybe shouldn't be a debate. But like go find your people. Go find the people that you vibe with, and I'm gonna find the people that vibe with me, and that's how we're gonna do it.
Sage is just trying to find people who accept her nose ring. I kind of decided with my little social media break that I was going to give myself this time to just not be in all of the noise that's happening, because I knew regardless of what happened this couple of weeks, like there was going to be people saying a lot of things about it. And I've kept up with it like a little bit through other sources, like on YouTube and stuff, but then the whole TikTok thing happened and the Meta thing. I have been severely questioning as well, like, do I want to stay on these platforms? And Facebook, I use constantly for Marketplace because we buy a lot of used things for whatever we need here. Messenger, I use to communicate with all of my egg people, and that's not really something that I don't care to give a whole bunch of people my phone number. Like, I like being able to turn off the notifications on that Messenger app or delete it, and be not available if I don't want to be. So I've decided I'm going to keep that for those reasons. And the Instagram thing, I decided over the last couple of weeks, like, yeah, you're right, Sage. We should just be who we're going to be, and the people who are vibing with that will come to us, and those who aren't are going to leave, and that's perfectly fine. It's since fall, November in particular, I have had a good outlet with my close friends list, and you call it being loud, I'm going to call it being unhinged. I decided I'm just going to start posting those things to my regular story once I get back on my Instagram, because if people really don't agree with what I believe in, which is, like you said, fundamental human rights, then I don't know that I really want them following me anyway. Like, that feels icky to me. So I think I'm just gonna embrace that similarly. I'm very much not a confrontational person at all. Like, I don't love to have arguments. I don't like when people are combative in comments and things. Like, I think I'm gonna turn off my comments on my posts, and I'm gonna turn off my story responses, and I'm just gonna post whatever the hell I want to post and be who I'm gonna be. And that's like the most authentic way that I can think of going about it, and also preserving my mental well-being.
Yeah, and I think one last point that's worth discussing before we move on to something else is that neither one of us are trying to be self-pitying or like whatever else with this whole like, oh, I'm finally to this place where I can openly express my opinions online. It really is, at least for me, I guess chime in how it's different for you. For me, it really is a process of taking accountability for some of the ways that, like, as a white woman, I feel like I was raised to be like very non-confrontational and put everyone else's comfort above mine. And it takes unprogramming. It takes unlearning that. And I don't want anyone to feel bad for me that I'm a recovering people pleaser, but it's just acknowledging that those are the unhealthy patterns that I have and stepping out of that and actively pushing myself outside of my comfort zone, which is the whole reason that I started putting myself out there on social media under Terra Nova Acres to begin with. That is part of that unlearning. That is part of that unraveling. And this is just the next step in that.
I think the only thing that I would change about what you just said, at least for me, like personally, is yes, I would consider myself a recovering, if not just a people pleaser, just like as I was raised. But you said putting other people's comfort above my own, and I think that at this point in time, doing that my entire life, it's way more comfortable for me to do that. Like, that's me putting my comfort first. Like, I don't want to make myself uncomfortable, so I don't speak up a lot of the times, or I put things on my close friend story instead of my main story, because I don't want people messaging me and being combative and like having confrontation. So I think it's other people's comfort in certain terms as well as my own, but doing that is making it so that other people are uncomfortable who shouldn't be uncomfortable. Like, there are things that need to be spoken about.
So I brought up the eggs earlier kind of as a way that I felt like I started to try to build community and kind of failed at it. Do you have any ways that you feel like you've done that you've tried to or gone into something with the intention to build that community and it just didn't pan out?
It's hard to pinpoint one specific thing. I know that this happens on a very consistent basis for me, though, because of that, like, anxiety at not driving places. Like, I can't meet up with people because I can't drive. So I just, like, I'm so antisocial. As much as I want to be social, it's just this push and pull. So the answer to this is I fail at community building on a regular basis, but I don't give up on it. However, I will give one specific example, and that is a Facebook, like, girls group that's in my town, like our general area, and there's, like, a lot of people in that group, and they do monthly or multiple times a month, they all go out to lunch or dinner and have these activities and stuff that they all do, and it's literally every month. They're very good about keeping it consistent, and I've gone to one, and I'm still in the group, and I, like, keep track of things, and I want to go do them, but I have a really hard time with it because they always go to a local restaurant or something, and I just really don't like going out to eat that much. And so it's really hard for me to justify spending money on food that I don't really think is that good. And then forcing myself to socialize with people that I don't know. And the one time that I went, I was by probably 20, 30 years the youngest person that showed up. And, like, I don't have any problem with socializing with older people. Like, I actually don't mind it at all. But it's really, I don't know, it's just a weird situation of, like, multiple factors making it difficult for me to want to participate in those things. And it might be just that, like, that's not the situation I should be participating in. I don't know. I would consider that, like, a semi-failed attempt at building community, though, for me. But yeah, there are definitely different ways I've also failed. I just can't pinpoint any of them. Are there any in particular that you can think of for yourself?
I really feel like anything that I've tried to just sell from the homestead. People talk about homestead side hustles all the time, but I don't know if it's just this inner resistance that I have or if it's just for other reasons it doesn't pan out, but selling the eggs instead of, just like sharing them in some other format didn't really work. And then also selling plant starts. I think that one's a little trickier because you have to do things like anticipate when people are going to be looking at plant starts for their garden because you can't be too early or too late. It causes issues on both sides of things. But it's made me contemplate, like, okay, maybe I'm just trying to sell things to build community because I'm so entrenched in this. How many times have we said it? Hyper-capitalistic American society. I'm like, this is how I make friends. I'm gonna trade my stuff for your money. And so I'm just walking away from that. I'm much more interested in the trading and knowledge sharing and just like sharing space kind of deal, honestly, these days.
I've also kind of fallen into that rhythm of, like, you know what? I'm not even going to call it that. I think that it's just another thing that's ingrained in us from being children is, like, oh, you should be an entrepreneur. Like, you can make money off of this. Every hobby that I am interested in, I'm like, I could sell that. And I feel like that's not a really good way to think about it. Like, if it's something that brings you joy or relaxes you, reduces your overstimulation in the world that we live in, like, that's not the way to think about it. But that's just inherently how I think about things. So I think about this often now. Like, in the past year, I've really started to think, how can I give things away? Like, how can I, the the produce stand that we have up at the road eventually, can I sell eggs from that but give away extra produce? Will that get people to come more if I'm giving away flowers and produce but selling my eggs still? Or maybe I'll just have a free produce stand up there and still sell my eggs via Facebook. I'm constantly thinking about that kind of stuff. And honestly, one of the first things that came to my mind when the election results came in, like November was a very thoughtful, like introspective month for me for this kind of stuff. And really, like, this entire episode that we're talking about is mutual aid. It's not something that we've mentioned, but it would be considered mutual aid, like the things we're talking about here. The first thing I thought of after the election was I need to build some raised beds somewhere on my property, not necessarily in my specific garden, but maybe over in the kudzu area. Like, if we can get that maintained and cleaned up, I need to build some raised beds, or I need to establish some sort of growing space over there that I can put in that girls group on Facebook and say, hey, anybody who doesn't have a yard, if you live in an apartment around here, or you just don't have any space to grow things, come use this as a community garden, because I have 8 acres and most of it's overgrown and not being used right now. That's literally the absolute minimum I could do to help people in some sort of way. So I think about that a lot. I don't know if it's going to happen this year, but it's definitely on my mind of something that, like, I really want that to be a thing that I can offer my community.
In a very similar vein, that's kind of one of the reasons that I bought the high tunnel. So there's the greenhouse and the high tunnel. And both increase my capacity for the number of plants that I can grow from seed and then grow through production. And it was like, okay, if stuff might be about to hit the fan, and if I am looking at figuring out a way to be a contributing and effective community member, or at least preparing to have that potential, even if it's not needed, right? Like, what are my strengths? What do I bring to the community? And that was something that I started to think about during the storm, and then continued to think about through all of these political changes. And to me, it's pretty clear. Like, I am really good at growing food, and I am not like chef level boasting, but like comparatively, I'm really good at cooking food. And so that might seem like basic or elemental or like rudimentary, but I don't I don't really care if it's rudimentary. Like, it's what I'm good at. That is what I feel like I can bring to the table the most effectively to a community. And so I want to be prepared to grow way more than I need and be in a place to share it. Just in case. I would so much rather have that buffer, not for myself, for other people, because none of us are in this alone. We are all in this together. And if my neighbor down the road is suffering, I'm suffering.
I think something else that we talk about a lot, and it's not something that we've accomplished. It's definitely something that we need to work on. Oh, in general, but specifically for the podcast. Going back to social media for a minute and thinking about our goals for building community, social media in particular, but also your local community. Like, we have so many opportunities to build the community that we want, regardless of who you're surrounded by in like your very close vicinity. And we have taken on the task of bringing on guests to our podcast, and we talk about this very, like, honestly, we talk about this probably bi-weekly at this point. Like, we're doing a decent job at representing different sides of homesteading, I think, from different points of view, but we still have a severe lack of representation in other forms, I guess. If you've noticed, every single person we've had on this podcast is a white person.
Is a white woman, which
Yeah.
I don't feel bad, I'll say, overrepresenting the female perspective. because I feel like it's already underrepresented in the larger homesteading community from my personal perspective and in my personal opinion. But yeah, it's a function of like everyone that I work with is white. Everyone on my road, at least that I've ever seen out and about, is white. Like, you go to a homesteading convention, how many people in that room are white? It's a lot. And I guess that depends a little bit on where you live. But, I live in Western North Carolina now, which is, at least insofar as I go and travel around, disproportionately white. I lived in Colorado. Holy crap, that state is white. Oh my gosh. And we need to go out of our way to be different, because again, like if you don't say anything, if you don't do anything, if you don't take any meaningful action towards change, even if it's small, even if it's incremental, like, you're the problem. So right now, we're the problem.
Definitely. And I mean, obviously, the first part of that is recognizing that, right? Like, the first step towards change is recognizing it, but we've recognized it, and it's something that we're semi-actively working towards. I wouldn't say that we've done an amazing job at it so far, but
I would love for some people to get back to me that I've reached out to.
I know.
That would be great.
I mean, I feel like that could get into a whole other thing of like people not feeling comfortable because we are two white women. Which
Totally.
is
And that's so valid. That's so valid. And I can only imagine that if things were reversed, that I would also be thinking like, okay, well, do you actually want to talk to me, or are you just trying to make yourself look good, like trying to represent this diversity? Like, do you actually care? Because how many times is that performative?
Yeah.
It's a lot of the time that it's performative.
Yeah, I mean, even having this conversation could be considered such. So I don't have
I'd
the
like
answer.
to think that it's us trying to be open about our flaws and community, but I'm sure that there's an element of it that's that to some extent, because I haven't fully unpacked all the things that I would need to unpack to I'm working on it. I promise.
There's a whole lot of depth here, and it's a very fine line of trying to figure this out. So yeah. I don't have much else to say on that, and I know that we're not in the right on it completely. But I just felt like that needed to be stated. So are there any other ways that you're trying to or want to in the future build community that you've thought of so far?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't need to be as grand as like buying extra equipment like a high tunnel to grow more food, right? It can be as simple as sharing a meal. Just sharing. I have homegrown food to share, but sharing any food and having that sort of meal and conversation and that sort of thing, that's so valuable. Like, I don't know, maybe that's me and my values, but I will eat good food and have good conversation absolutely any day. Like, that is my idea of a good time. I'm not a complicated person. If I have good food and good company, I am very content.
The thought of like sharing food, especially in the homesteading community, has really shown me how much I overthink things. Because I have often pictured myself like meeting up with other homesteaders and like not anybody in particular, just like in general homestead community, and thinking, okay, well, what if I brought an ingredient that like they buy all of the organic things and they don't eat this because it's from the store or it's not organic or whatever it may be. I've like even let that thought stop me from wanting to participate in certain things, and obviously that's not something that should matter that much. Just to throw that out there, like that's a thought I've had, like, okay, I don't know if it's like am I good enough to like communicate and be in community with these people. It's more of like I don't know what to expect from people sometimes, and like I let that get to me. I often think about things like our apple cider pressing and the like learning how to can, having read over to teach how to can this summer, those are kinds of things that I really would love to embrace and maybe teach people on like a very small scale, like maybe having one person or two people over to teach them how to can. I've taught a handful of people how to can at this point. It's always a really fun time. Like you're just hanging out and you're talking, and sometimes the subjects get deep. And I know that people in that local Facebook group that I was talking about want to learn how to can. I know they want to learn how to garden. I would love to have friends over when we're actually doing our mead and cider and not just pressing the cider, like showing people how that's done. Like we had a couple friends at our little cider pressing party this fall that they were asking how we actually make the cider, like the hard cider. And I was like, you guys should come over next year when we do this, because it's a whole process, but it's really fun. And once you know what you're doing, it's super easy and super cool, and it's just fun to hang out. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff that goes on, but it's with a lot of hands, it's chill, you know, like it would be a good time. But yeah, like you said, hanging out around good food and just talking, like good conversation, like having dinner, a really good homemade dinner, talking with friends, having a campfire, and like, I don't know, some beer or some apple pie moonshine or something like around the campfire when it's not 100-degree day. That sounds like my ideal like socialization.
I would love to do a lot more trading knowledge and trading even labor with people. Like in terms of what I have, I have a lot of food. I might not have a lot of money in my bank account, but I got eggs and I'm about to have a lot of milk. And so when I think about what I have to offer and trading things, I would so much rather like commit to paying someone with, a dozen eggs a week and maybe a pint of milk a week for the season, like 6 months, whatever, in exchange for something like helping me put the greenhouse together, over like writing them a check, right? Like that's so easy for me to share from my overflow of these things that I have a ton of anyway, than it is to give somebody money. And I think maybe not completely. I understand we have money in society to some extent. But also, I think if we were able to go back to more of like a bartering and a trading system, I think it would end up bringing us a lot closer together and fostering community in ways that exchanging money just can't. It just can't replace that.
I also feel like it would really lend to reducing your stress level in general, because if you have excess of something and you don't have the time to deal with it because you're trying to work to make money instead, like you don't have the time to deal with all of this milk, and you're able to get some sort of good in exchange for that excess that's causing you stress. Like that's ideal, is it not? At least in my mind, that's ideal. Like that would be fantastic.
Very ideal. Can confirm.
That reminds me also of something I consider a lot when we're thinking about purchasing tools and more expensive things in general, I would say, like homesteading supplies. I don't necessarily feel like we need to buy a tractor because we so rarely need one that if I direly needed a tractor, I can ask the neighbors to bring their tractor down the road and help us with whatever we need. Same with the trailer. Like we just borrowed the neighbor's trailer this weekend, and they were saying, or I was like, I feel like we use this more than you guys do, like constantly saying thank you, because I am so grateful that they let us use that, because it's such an expensive purchase. And they're like, we're just glad that it's getting used. Like it's just sitting here otherwise, so you might as well use it. And thinking about buying an excavator for the project that we need, like in my mind, that is not only beneficial for all of the projects we need it for, but as a way to be able to, I guess, barter, but be able to repay our neighbors if they ever need to dig trenches for like French drains or hose lines, whatever. Like being able to communicate in that bartering language, I guess, of having something else to offer. Like, it is so valuable. The thought of that is so valuable to me, not just for our purposes, because I know that it can benefit other people that I am in community with. And that's really cool to think about.
Right. I mean, think about the amount of capital it would take for all of your neighbors and you to have all of the shovels, to have all of the tractors, to have all of the trailers, to have all of the excavators, to have all of the broad forks, to have like, how many tools can I list off right now? Like, so many. Versus having communal tools where it makes sense. Like, yeah, it probably still makes sense for everybody to have a shovel, especially if you're a homesteader because you're using it all the time. But being able to pool resources like that and act as a community, how much time can you save that you would otherwise dedicate towards maybe something that, if you're like me, just like doesn't set your soul on fire or set your heart on fire in a good way? Like, you're just sitting in front of a computer, like managing data because gotta make some sort of a paycheck to pay the mortgage. Like, that's not just an arbitrary number on a screen in a bank account, right? Like, that's you're trading your life for money. And if you don't have to, if you can just share, get over this thing that we've been convinced of, that like we all need to have all the stuff all the time, and just pull those resources. It's a big deal.
Especially when it comes to the bigger things. But even something like a broad fork, like, that's like a medium expense. Or even something like butchering days, like you said earlier, coming together and tackling that project as a group, it makes it, one, a little bit more fun, regardless of what you're trying to do. It makes it a little less sad if it's a butchering day. Like, if it takes your mind off of it. It gives you somebody to converse with, and you can kind of go through the actions and respect what you're doing, but also it doesn't have to be like, oh, I hate that I'm doing this right now. Like, you can have jokes and laugh and, again, build community. But it just makes it easier. You have extra people to set up, you have extra people to do the task, you have extra people to clean up afterwards. You can share, I guess if it's butchering, you can share the meat if you wanted to. Like, there's so many benefits to it. I really, like, I can't think of a downside, honestly, to collaborating with people.
I guess unless they break your stuff all the time, that would get pretty frustrating.
That's
There are
true.
some potential downsides.
But I feel like in that situation, if you're sharing things with people you trust and are in community with on a regular basis, that a lot of the times people will have the integrity to, like, if they were to break something, like, pay you back for it in some sort of way. Like, if I were to break a tool, I would do anything I could to, like, repay someone for that. I know not everybody's like that, but that's for you to judge. I think overall, this topic of building community and homesteading makes me ponder, what did life look like? What would life look like now if we did those big projects together? Like, a whole bunch of people came together and brought all their tomatoes and had conversations while they were canning their tomatoes, while they were raising and butchering their meat, while they were, like, sewing things. I know that quilting parties used to be a thing. Maybe they still are. I know people got together in the past for, like, community dances. That's how people met each other. Things like barn raising, like the meat and cider making, like I mentioned earlier, preserving food, going in on any form of meat animal, like somebody's raising the pigs, but you're paying for the feed. Like, they're paying in their time, you're paying for the feed, and then you're butchering them together and splitting the meat. Victory gardens, like, all that kind of stuff. It just makes me think about it, and I like to think about what the world would be like if we embraced all that stuff again, or for the first time. Thanks for joining us on this episode of She Said Homestead. We hope you enjoyed our chat. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Send your homesteading stories to us at shesaidhomestead@gmail.com. We can't wait to share them on the air. To stay connected, follow us on Instagram for updates and sneak peeks at what's coming up next.
If you like video podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the She Said Homestead YouTube channel too. We can't thank you enough for being part of the She Said Homestead community. Until next time, happy homesteading.